Hey everyone, welcome back to Berlin Noir. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the previous overview episode and got a good idea of all the progress we've made so far in the city. But for today, we're going to be returning to where we have been previously on the south side of Kreuzberg, and we'll be working primarily, or at least starting off, I should say, in this area here, starting with the church there in the center. That is the church at the South Star, Kirche am Südstern, which is a pretty cool name. And I guess named after the supposed star shape of the plaza. I wouldn't quite call it a star, but that's what it was renamed. At the time, it was a Kaiser Friedrich Platz, but was later renamed after the war. But so for this church here, I'm using, I believe, it's the Church of the Ascension from Dresden, I think. One of you recommended that I use this particular church here since originally I had a different one here, which is actually used in this episode as well. You might have saw it briefly a second ago, off to one of the sides. But I do end up using that church as well later on. But this one, I definitely agree, is definitely fits us pretty well. It has a general shape, size, color, and all that, which at this point is really all I can ask for, considering how many churches, of course, are in the city and all the ones that I need to use. Really, all I can go for is the general shape and general size, which I'd say this one actually works pretty well for this. But I added those decals there, those stone decals, converting them to PO so I can lay them on top without having them, cover the asphalt, or I should say the stone or the stone road, since I just wanted to kind of break up the just standard pavement stone texture that I have everywhere. And this was a nice, easy area to do it since it's kind of like its own little island. So I could just lay that decal down and just cover that little center area there. But yeah, for the detailing on this, it was pretty straightforward, just adding some little these curbs, these planters around the church, and just adding these flowers. These are, I really do like these flowers because they're pretty small, and you can fit them in smaller areas, or of course kind of clump them together to make them look a little more full, a little take up more room, more space. Once again, I'm using the prop version of the flowers, since I have the mod that converts all trees and props to flowers, just so I can raise the flowers up slightly so they're not hidden in the curbs and the planters, because otherwise just the very, very top of them would be showing, and it doesn't look very good. So it's a very, very useful mod. Kind of taxing on your PC if you have a lot of plants or trees and cars and such, because I don't believe there's any option to selectively, convert trees, certain trees or certain cars or anything to props. It just does it for everything. So you basically double your number of trees and double your number of cars you have subscribed to on the workshop. So yeah, it's not the best way to do it, but considering it is pretty useful in many instances, I like using it. But moving on from that, since it was pretty easy just doing the simple plaza there, some simple detailing with the curbs and such, but now we are kind of revisiting this road here. This is a Hassenheide, and I built this a few episodes ago along with the Hermannplatz department store and some of the gasometers that are on the left side. And what I missed during that episode, or I should say what I missed as I was building, was the little gardens that line the street. So as you saw there just a second ago, that there was quite a lot of space in front of the buildings, as you can see right there, right? Just about a whole unit, right? One of the in-game cells, about that much space I allowed. Move it back, of course, because you see placing the buildings there are right on the street front, so it's very easy, of course, just to continue like that and not worry about it. But I did actually notice that there were gardens basically right after I finished recording everything for that one episode when we built the street, because I was initially looking at it and couldn't quite tell what I was looking at uh, with the aerial view that I showed at the very start. This area, it's not the best lighting. I think the photo was a little underexposed, so it's pretty dark and a little blurry. But like I said, it was a little too late, but I did notice it at the very, very end, and also one of you mentioned as well. So I thought that'd be a nice little addition, adding some simple detailing, since it is definitely noticeable today for certain. It's a much wider avenue if you take into account the gardens there, and it's a very simple way to just add some detailing, make the area look much nicer than just having simple street front without very much going on. But so I just used those grass curbs, which I really like, because I really like the grass texture of those of that asset. It doesn't use the grass texture of whatever you have. Some curbs do that, which is definitely nice as well. But I always like finding as many possible textures and colors to have in the city with grass and dirt, just because, of course, that's much more realistic. So I do like those and how they look, and they're quite low profile too. They're much smaller. Not the curb's not the size of like half the size of the people walking around, as it seems with some of the assets there on the workshop. But just for simple detailing, I wanted to add some of these fences on some of them, not on all of them, just because I figured some might not have fences. Some would just have some flowers, bushes, whatever. But I just use those two varieties of the fences, basically the two that I use all around the city, since they're nice, and of course they're networked, which is so useful. I hardly ever use non-networked fences anymore, just because it's so much easier just to lie down the network, especially with curves and such like that, which is very, very difficult with prop versions. But yeah, definitely a big time saver. But so just continuing the detailing on the front, I'm going to start adding the vegetation, flowers, trees, bushes. Wanted to add a little fountain there for the birds, and some pigeons as well. I always like adding those little details. I've done that a number of times around the city, just because it brings to life the city a bit more, I think, and it's a very simple thing to do. A lot of times I just do that off camera when I'm detailing the center of blocks and such, which I don't think it's very noticeable a lot of the times. But just for me personally, that's one thing I like building a lot, just because it's kind of fun, as I mentioned. But so I do detail both sides of the street, of course, doing the same thing. Up until this point, I've kind of only showed one side. So I showed laying the curbs, or the grass planters, curbs, whatever you want to call them, on the other side, and now we're detailing this side with the plants and such, just so it's not too monotonous and all, since it was pretty time consuming, since I did try and take my time making it detailed, not making it very repetitive. Right? I didn't want to just copy and paste stuff around, since of course that is very easy to do, but it's it's a little lazy, I suppose. Sometimes it's definitely necessary when you have larger areas, but for something small, just a tiny street like this, I definitely wanted to make it a little more unique and each thing kind of be its own. And also because at the time I was with this, trying to make this episode, because if you noticed, last week there was no episode, and that's because I was having trouble just figuring out what I wanted to do with this episode, because I started building the church, and then I started building this street here, detailing the gardens on the front. But after that, I was running out of ideas, or I should say I was running out of, I guess, certainty of what I wanted to do, because I wanted to start working on the Hassenheide, the park, the cemeteries, and there's also a shooting range back then. But I just couldn't find any pictures of exactly what it looked like. And looking at the aerial view, I had no idea. I couldn't make out anything. Just looked like rows of trees and bushes for the shooting range. And I wanted to try and make it a little more accurate, try and figure out exactly what it was, because I didn't want to go into it blind, really, since I figured there was some resource out there that's got to have some pictures of that. So I ended up not doing that in this episode just because I couldn't find it. So if anyone has any pictures or just some sort of information on at least that shooting range that used to exist down there, I asked on my Discord, and one of you said you couldn't really find much, and same issue for myself. But if anyone has any pictures, definitely give them to me. So for the second half of today's episode, we're going to be working on a few different things, kind of starting towards the Hassenheide Park area. So this is directly south of the road we were just working on. That is the church that I mentioned at the start that I initially had in the plaza that we built. It is pretty similar in shape, but it is smaller. So I do definitely like the other one for that plaza. But this one definitely fit in well because, again, it generally has the same shape and color as the church that is there. I believe that's the St. John Basilica. But yeah, this is there's a few things that we do. So I kind of jump around. I don't actually finish the church here because there's right there to the right where there's kind of like the starting of a garden, I suppose. I actually think that's a hospital. I did see on the map somewhere that it said it was a hospital because I was looking at that building and I couldn't tell what it was. But I could tell that it had some sort of garden, so I just started doing that. But again, like I said, it kind of jumps around a bit, and that kind of goes into the fact that, as I mentioned already, I was kind of a little uncertain of where this episode was going, what was going to be built. But one thing that I wanted to build, because it's very unique, and even though it's not necessarily accurate to the time period, is this outdoor gymnasium. So this is right in the same area. This picture here is sometime from the early 1800s. But this gymnasium, or outdoor gymnasium, was kind of encouraged by Friedrich Ludwig Jahn, which I guess is a pretty prominent figure in German history for both good and bad reasons. And today there's a monument to him in this area. But I guess he encouraged just athleticism and gymnasts to, of course, work on their body, but not necessarily for personal growth, more so for the German Empire. And of course, nationalism, which was basically the way of the world during that time period, all the way up, of course, into even the early 1900s. But it's a very cool area. So at least according to Wikipedia, the outdoor gymnasium didn't survive very long. Only not even 10 years. It was taken down. It says for political turmoil, not exactly what that means. But I'm not exactly sure how some wooden structures are political, but it's a different time, I suppose. But yeah, so I wanted to build it, even though, like I said, it's not exactly accurate because it didn't exist at the time, I don't think. But it's just an interesting filler, something that I'd really have no other time or opportunity to build in any sort of city. But basically, I was just using whatever kind of wooden structures that I could find that I was subscribed to. As you can see already, I used a water tower. Those other structures there are, I believe, from bridge supports. And then I'm just adding some wires here, which I intend more so to be ropes. Perhaps they could be climbing across or even walking across. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I don't know. Like I guess it's a pretty cool idea to include in the city, and I can imagine it was pretty fun, right? Basically, an adult playground, climbing around, doing whatever. Certainly, lots of fun. I did try and include some stuff that has the general appearance of gymnastic equipment, such as these right here. I kind of want it to be like not parallel bars. I don't know the terminology exactly, but just something that seemed reasonably looking as though it's gymnastic equipment. Which, if you looked at that picture that I showed at the very start, it wasn't exactly high tech or anything. It really was, for the most part, just some wooden structures and such. So that's mostly what I went for there. But it was pretty quick, just adding those. But there's also the memorial there to Jan, who, as I mentioned, was the person behind the gym and just general gymnastics for men during this time period, or I should say during the 1800s. But so this monument, the statue still exists today. I just used some generic statue that I was subscribed to, but just mostly taking up space since I didn't really want to make the gym area too large. So I placed this in the back side of it, which actually is kind of how it is in real life. I didn't really take that into account. I was kind of just building, and then I looked later and I was like, oh wow, it happens to be almost the same general shape and size and location of it in real life. But that little circular track thing there is just, I guess, a small jogging running track. Obviously, it's very, very small compared to one that would be, around a football field or something like that. But again, just kind of trying to take up space and just another something in the area that looks reasonably like something used for physical activity. But just laying trees around the outside, since kind of make this area look nicer, since it is a very large park area, and eventually, this entire thing will be filled in. Not sure if it's going to be the next episode, since, as I mentioned, I'm not really certain on a lot of the stuff in the park back then, aside from the cemeteries, which are pretty easy to replicate. There's just other things, like I said, that I'm just not sure on. So any pictures or information, again, would be very much appreciated. Definitely on my Discord, you can send me any photos or anything like that in the chats. Very much appreciated if anyone can find anything else. But so this here is, like I said, I think it is a hospital. When I was building it, I actually wasn't certain. I saw a kind of building that looked different from the rest of them, right? Compared to just your general German Berlin-looking buildings that line city blocks. This one definitely stood out as a little different, so I used whatever this asset is. I think it's by Comrade Intense, just a nice little, somewhat generic but somewhat nice-looking building. It could more or less be whatever you want it to be, which is, I always love assets like that. But just detailing the center with some simple curbs and some flowers. So, I suppose it could still be a hospital, right? It's a very small hospital, definitely. But nonetheless, I guess it could be for a select group of people. Probably not for the general population, I imagine, considering its size. But around this point, I was definitely going pretty heavy on the details, maybe a little more than usual. Since I wasn't sure if I was going to have enough footage for an entire episode, actually, since it is a relatively small area that I was building. So I did want to go pretty heavy on the details and do more than just laying trees and bushes, since that's definitely repetitive and a little boring after a while. And as far as looking at details go, it's quite simple. So I wanted to add a lot of walls, a lot of fences, some of these areas behind buildings with some small light detailing. So yeah, it was definitely a nice change doing this on a little more micro level. Just adding a lot more fences and walls, which makes a huge difference than just having these open grass areas without really anything lining them, as I often do. Although sometimes I do use small bushes a lot, which is a simple way to mark the different areas and different paths and separate the grass from the paths and whatnot. But yeah, again, this was definitely fun, though. I don't know if it was because of all the detailing here or if there was a particular asset that I used at some point, but my FPS was crap after a certain point. You might have noticed already, but sometimes in the footage, because of course this is sped up at 500%, so it's definitely harder to tell. but especially when I was using Move It, it would freeze and kind of jerk around sometimes. And it appears to have fixed itself, because actually today I went in to record cinematics since I didn't want to attempt filming cinematics if I was going to have issues with it freezing and skipping. So I went in today to film those cinematics and record them, and it appears to have fixed itself. So hopefully it stays like that. But yeah, basically at around the or about 10-minute mark, so halfway through the video about, I started experiencing just really serious lag. No idea why it was, but yeah. So again, if it bugs you, sorry, couldn't do anything about it. I kept the simulation paused for the entire time, basically. Once I noticed that, as you can see, currently it's paused, just to hopefully make it a little better. I don't really think it did anything, but yeah, nonetheless, hopefully that's just some random occurrence that's not going to come up again in the future. But so moving on from that, for the last few minutes of the video, we're going to be working on the church here and then the cemetery behind it, which considering it's in a green area in a park, and there's definitely a whole lot of cemeteries in this area, it only seemed natural to put a cemetery here, although I'm not actually sure there was one. In fact, I'm pretty sure there wasn't. Since this was a garrison church, so for the military, and I think it actually still is today, for any Catholic soldiers in the military. So yeah, I didn't see on any maps that there was any cemeteries, but again, considering there's a whole lot of them in this Hassenheide area, I figured just to fill up some space, it makes sense to add some cemeteries. Since it's definitely simple to detail, and it's certainly realistic, because there's a whole lot of them again in this area. So that's pretty much going to do it for this episode. Hopefully you all enjoyed. If you haven't seen the previous episode, which was the overview episode, definitely check that out. You'll be able to see the entire city, everything built from the very first episode up into the most recent episode before this. Give you an idea of anything you want to see built next, or something like that. Yeah, there's a whole lot definitely built in the city thus far, and it was definitely good to see all your reactions to everything built so far, and definitely love how the series is coming along so far and everyone's input. It's a big help for sure. But if you are new to the channel and you've made it this far, then definitely subscribe. There's definitely a whole lot more of Berlin Noir coming. And definitely consider checking out my Patreon and join my Discord. It's a great place to chat about all things City Skylines and give your opinion on Berlin Noir. I'm trying to get the Discord going again, so it's my favorite way to get all your input, since it's a little more easy to communicate and message back and forth on there than it is on YouTube. But yeah. Next week, we'll probably continue somewhere in Hassenheide in this area, or if not in Hassenheide, then somewhere in the near vicinity. But yeah, that'll do it, and I will see you all then.